All right, ¿cómo están? How we doing? Let's see. Let's see how quick we can get through this. Listen, off the bat, everybody's giving credit, applauding Sam Cedar for trolling Dennis Prager. Why? For what purpose? What did he accomplish? Well, no one like Matt Bender provided that answer. It was nonsense. It was, in fact, if anything, Sam Cedar spread more misinformation in attempting to confront Dennis Prager by continuing his whitewashing of Zionism, then I don't know, pushing the line against Israel. We'll see how Gabor Mate, who for the most part I enjoy, his reflections, his analysis on like childhood trauma, issues like that. We see him speaking from both sides of his mouth, claiming to be critical and the need, the necessity to view Israel's current destruction of Gaza through a historical lens. And he immediately backtracks in order to remain in the good graces of Zionists. That's on Piers Morgan. And then we're going to look over how Mehdi Hasan, his show gets canceled. He's fired as a host, but now he's a contributor, right? So I'm sure he's taking a pay cut as he's going down. I think it's going to be the slow kind of descent or removal of him in any official capacity. But he still provides a lot of internet, viral sensation. Those moments are there. So they're going to keep him around for a little bit longer. But essentially, Mehdi Hassan's done. And while everybody applauds his, grilling of right wingers, he is a through and through DNC simp, right? He loves the Democratic Party and he's always rallying for them. So we see that even bending the knee to the DNC doesn't mean, you know, it's irrelevant to them when it comes to pushing back on the established narrative. And we're going to look at bad faith. Rihanna had, I don't want to mispronounce his name, but it's Craig, and I've been struggling with it. Craig Mokhiber, who we've covered before. He essentially quit working at the UN because of their complicity with a genocide or unwillingness to call it out as such. All right, so let's dive into it. Where are we starting? Look at this. The way that Sam Cedar is taken as a legitimate voice on the left, it goes to show, it demonstrates how desperate we are. How desperate we are for any legitimate voices. But it also shows why he chose Emma Vigeland as Michael Brooks' replacement. The most bland, uncharismatic, rich girl you've ever come across. Her parents, by the way, are corporate lawyers to donate in the thousands to the DNC. So it's no surprise, just like Nomiki Kant, that Sam Cedars cozied up to her and brought her into the fold. All right. I wonder how much her parents donated to the Majority Report in order to get her this position. All right. So Sam Cedar, it's his birthday. Uh, I forget, he's like 50 something years old and still, you know, barely center left. That's pathetic. That's sad. But he's still holding out to make it in Hollywood or to get that MSNBC position that Mehdi Hasan just lost. All right. So he has somebody, a proxy, call in to Dennis Prager's show. Most right wingers won't interact with Sam Seder. Sam Seder believes it's because he's afraid. They're all afraid of him, of his intellect. And the right wingers, like Tim Pool, claim that he's just a scumbag. I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. It's a little bit of both. He probably will wash most right wingers, but he is a scumbag, right? Emma Vigeland was, allowed on to Tim Pool's show, and she chose to act like a scumbag instead of actually breaking down Tim Pool's, incoherent ideology. She chose to just blatantly call him a neo-Nazi channel, right? Which, whatever criticisms you have of Tim Pool, he's not that. At least not outright. That's more of like Nick Fuentes, right? Alex Jones is more upfront about that. Tim Pool's, he's a little bit more slick. So when you approach him and his audience, you have to bring, you know, a scalpel, not a fucking hammer. But Emma Vigeland's just she's horrible at this. She's never had to be good at it. You know, her family's got the money for her to be mediocre at best and still succeed. So this is a debate that Sam chose, quote unquote, debate to have with Dennis Prager. By the way, Dennis does not even know this is Sam. He goes by Ron. So this is what I mean by being a scumbag. Like just finding these ways to corner people, which is fine if you're doing it to right wingers. The issue is the way that he sets this up in order to even get on. Not only is it right out a flat lie, which it's up to you whether you're comfortable with that. I find it irrelevant. The issue is that the lie sets up Sam Seder to be, or the character that he's playing, in a precarious situation where the audience is led to believe, as Matt Binder will later point out, he will later point out that is incoherent. His position is incoherent. All right, so let's hear it out.
243-777-6. Albany, Oregon. Ron, hello.
Hi, Dennis. Thanks so much for taking my call. I think I told your screener that my kid is in college, and there are protests going on there, and needless to say, Thanksgiving was a little bit rough.
Go on.
Well, my child, I don't want to say the college that they go to because I don't want them to be chased down or anything. But my
off the bat, because he lied, he had to set up this elaborate lie that he's a father calling, concerned that his son is participating in pro-Palestinian rallies on campus. Off the bat, Sam Seder has to say, oh, he addresses that and he says, I'm not going to say what campus he goes to because I'm worried about his safety. Right? While normally we would think, oh, he's worried about the safety in terms of the Canary Project. He's worried that he might be called out by the Zionists and targeted. Well, no, because he's calling into the Dennis Prager show. His audience is going to assume that what he's saying and what Sam Seder's saying in this character that he's portraying is, I'm worried that the Palestinians, Hamas, these quote unquote terrorists, are going to target him. So he's already adding fuel to the fire immediately from the offset, adding fuel to the fire that somehow Zionist voices, Jewish voices, might be targeted or have a legitimate sense of fear for their safety when speaking out against Palestine, right? So he's adding fuel to that. And it's all based on a lie, right? A lie that he's worried about his son, his non-existent child in this situation. This is why approaching things just with the lie, with an illegitimate premise, already kind of ruins your whole argument. Because in order to get accepted into these spaces in that insidious manner, you had to conform to their worldview off the bat. And we see this already.
My child, I don't want to say the college that they go to because I don't want them to be chased down or anything. But my concern is that my son doesn't appreciate what's going on in Israel at all, and doesn't understand what the dynamics are there. And it is increasingly a problem is what's going on these campuses.
Correct.
Anti-Semitism is a problem in this country. It is rising. I'm not sure if I subscribe totally to the idea that it's a function of secularism because, obviously the Spanish Inquisition, we had a lot of anti-Semitism that existed before any type of secular movement.
In the United States, it is. I make it clear in the column. You're right. American Christianity was totally different from European Christianity.
But I mean,
this was a Judeo-Christianity. It was pro-Jewish. That's why I read to you John Adams, who was a committed Christian.
Well, that's true.
That Jefferson and Jefferson, go on.
Well, I can tell you that, when my parents and my grandparents came over in the 1800s, they had to change their name. They couldn't get insurance. This was not a function that they were very pious.
Oh, so you're Jewish. Okay, that's interesting. So the fact is, however, that you're right, compared to a truly perfect society, it was a failure. Compared to every other society, why did they flee their society and come to America? If you would have asked your grandparents, are you happy you came to America, even though it was harder to get insurance, they probably would have laughed at you.
Oh, well, no, of course. They left because of pogroms, but they weren't secular in Russia at that time or Lithuania.
No, you're right. I've said all of my life to American Jews, my fellow Jews, that European Christianity was not the same as American Christianity. These are the Christians that put Torah script on the Liberty Bell.
Right.
That had you study Hebrew. That said the greatest contributions were made by Jews, like I read to you from John Adams. This was a different country. This was a different form of Christianity.
I agree. I agree. You have someone like John Hagee speaking at the...
So here we go. Sam Seder agrees with this premise that, Dennis Prager is pushing, that somehow American Christianity is different from European Christianity. Mind you, Ford was buddies with Hitler. The way that Europeans, or in this case, American Europeans, try to distance themselves from anti-Semitism as if the Klan wasn't, for the longest time, anti-Catholic, but fundamentally anti-Jewish. They were anti-Semites. It's one of their foundations. The first, of course, being anti-Black, pro-slavery, right? They want to genocide Africans. That is the foundation of the Klan. But the modern version, again, like most of these extreme right-wing movements, is rooted in the belief of anti-Semitic conspiracies that Jewish people are actually the ones manipulating, the blacks and the immigrants, right? So no, Prager is absolutely wrong in attempting to distance the American European Christianity from the European Christianity.
The rally for...
He mentioned some guy who's pretty irrelevant. They go on a break here. But all I want to just highlight is the way that off the bat, already two things Sam Seder has conceded or given field to is one, that Jewish people are somehow, college students are somehow in danger on campuses if they speak out against Palestine, which is, an upside down world there. And two, that Prager is right by attempting to distinguish the anti-Semitism in European Christianity and American European Christianity. So he's 0-2 so far. But Emma Viglin's over here giggling, so that's awesome.
So my biggest concern is we just had the greatest attack on Jews since the Holocaust take place. And I look at Israel as a place that was founded, at least in part, to protect Jews. And I think that after 70...
There we go again. There we go again. Repeating this line that October 7th was the greatest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. That is Zionist propaganda to the T. Now, whether Sam Seder actually believes this or not is irrelevant because this is what he's pushing to not only Dennis's audience, but to his now. Because the distinction for his audience is going to be difficult to make in terms of his decision. All right. So now he did two things. One, he's now propagating the Zionist line that October 7th was the greatest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. Well, we know that's just a Zionist propaganda, because it wasn't an attack on Jewish people. It was an attack on Zionist settler colonialism. That's what it was, an attack on quote unquote Israelis, not Jewish people. But he's pushing that, and what makes it difficult is, okay, the Prager audience is believing that he's legitimate in this, and what he's saying, so they are being fed that even those criticizing or critical of Israel believe that October 7th was the greatest attack on Jewish people, which is a Zionist lie. But now also Sam's audience, because they're quote unquote in, the joke here, the troll, do they know Sam's position on this? Whether or not he believes or accepts the Zionist line that October 7th was the greatest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust? You see why this whole structure is just counterproductive, but it's gonna get him clicks, it's gonna get him attention, it's gonna get him applause. Because he can't do it on his own. He's too fucking boring. He's been doing this for decades and he stutters and mumbles his way through every broadcast. But alongside Emma Vigeland, he looks great. He's not repeating the same mistake with Michael Brooks. He's not going to get outshined. But again, just dropping the ball left and right. And then he follows this up with what he's been doing now for weeks about trying to whitewash Zionism and the Zionist settler colonial project.
Holocaust take place. And I look at Israel as a place that was founded, at least in part, to protect Jews. And I think that after 75 years, what we're looking at is a situation where that project has failed. And I think in part it's failed because of the way that Israel has gone about it.
Okay, so we now into the third arena. They're all related.
Exactly.
Let me just say this about John Hagee. First of all, I never, ever.
So there we go. Again, pushing that line, pushing the line that somehow Israel was in part founded to protect Jewish people. No, Israel was founded to give Zionists a land. But he'll double down on the historical revisionism, on just the outright lies of the history of Zionism.
Judge people on the basis of their beliefs.
Israel has gone about it.
Okay, so we now into the third arena. They're all related. Let me just say this about John Hagee. First of all, I never, ever judge people on the basis of their beliefs. I'm sure you're annoyed when Christians think you're going to hell because you don't believe in Christ. So why are you annoyed with John Hagee for his religious beliefs? And indeed, that's what he said. I have reviewed it. It's not fully clear to me, but let's say he said that. God sent Hitler. My father, who was an Orthodox Jew and fought Hitler in the U.S. Navy for 3 years, believed that God sent Hitler because he couldn't believe that the Holocaust just happened and God watched it. There are
well, that's a yes, but that is a
okay. So fine. So why exactly? How remarkably different was my father's view? I don't agree with my father, but it doesn't matter. As I said, I judge beliefs, but I don't judge people by their beliefs.
Which is nonsense, but okay.
Of Christians, it is the Kufi Christians.
Well, yes, no, I know that, but Dennis, that actually makes my other point because I do think that intent. I do think intent is important here. So it is true that that Israel has a lot of support from Kufi and other Christian Zionists, but they want the Jews there so that they go through hellfire. And I also know that the Netanyahu. That is exactly the prophecy that Hagee is talking.
Literal scapegoats. And if you look at the history of the word scapegoat, it's ironically in this situation, a Jewish term to relinquish their sins, and that's what Christian Zionists, these evangelical Christians. The only reason they support Israel is because they believe, the Messiah is going to return. Countless of Jewish people who will not accept him as their Lord and Savior, their Messiah, will burn in hell. Some Jewish people will survive, but the majority.
Talking about. And,
no.
And I will also say this with Netanyahu also making common cause with
yes, because he's making common cause because the greatest support in America for his country is coming from Christian Zionists.
Well, but I think that's problematic in the end. Well, I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to explain because I think what it breeds is a type of singular nationalism in Israel, which has left Jews unsafe. The road that could have been taken with Zionists.
So
we know that there was a strand of Zionist thought. No, not Israel. I'm saying certain elements within Israel, because we know there was Zionist thought starting in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, where the idea of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy could have taken hold. Folks like Buber and Hannah Arendt espoused.
Well,
Instead, we have a fascist.
Don't be shocked that your child has taken your ideas to their conclusion.
Look at this fucking scumbag. I'm trying not to curse anymore, but wow. This is insane. The fact that he continues to spread this lie, this Zionist revisionist lie that somehow there was a good Zionist, right? And he's had this author down. Now, I was trying to avoid pain for this liberal Zionist for his book about a humanist, or a the people's Zionism. But I might have to get it because what Sam Seder's doing is disgusting. It's insidious. People trust him. People that claim to be on the left, mostly liberals. But I know, and I've seen a lot of far left, quote unquote, right? Far left people tune in to the Majority Report. And Sam Seder continues to spread this lie that there was somehow a gracious, a humble, a truly good-spirited. So how else do you want to whitewash this? That there was a good version of Zionism. There never was. There can't be inherently. By definition, Zionism is rooted in conquest, in taking over land. So this lie that he continues to spread that, we know that at one point there was good Zionism, is utter bullshit. Is the pinnacle, the epitome of liberal Zionism. They so desperately want to wash the sins of Israel and save it to legitimize its continuous existence, that they're willing to lie. Because we know that Zionism is actually rooted in Christianity. Again, because in the Christian faith, they believe that Jewish people need to return back to the Holy Land so the Messiah can return. Before Jewish people actually took hold of Zionism, it was a Christian project. But Sam Seder does not go that back. Because then he has to admit that Zionism is inherently, a colonial ideology. So he keeps spreading this lie, not just now to a right-wing audience, but to his audience. He's been doing this since October 7th. Hear him again.
Israel is
type of
for his country is coming from Christian Zionists.
Well, but I think that's problematic in the end. Well, I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to explain because I think what it breeds is a type of singular nationalism in Israel, which has left Jews unsafe. The road could have been taken with Zionists.
So
we know that there was a strand of Zionist thought. No, not Israel. I'm saying certain elements within Israel, because we know there was Zionist thought, starting in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, where the idea of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy could have taken hold. Folks like Buber and Hannah Arendt espoused. Instead, we have a fascist.
Don't be shocked that your child has taken your ideas to their conclusion.
Into the early 1900s, where the idea of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy could have taken hold.
Multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy. Multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy could have taken hold. Who would have established that, right? In this regard, right? As he's attempting to whitewash Zionism. Zionists would have established that, right? It would have been this big dream of his, or the big lie that somehow Zionism is more than settler colonialism, would have meant that still Europeans had to come to the land and establish a government, force their ideologies onto the indigenous population. So instead of having the indigenous population establish their governments, find their nationalist movement, instead the Europeans would have came through and what, Sam? Civilize them? Taught, not only force them, but teach them how to live together? The thing they were already doing? But you see how no matter how you phrase it, Zionism fundamentally depends or is rooted in colonialism. And Sam Seder has continuously, since October 7th, whitewashed this, attempting to find a new version or reclaim Zionism. But even in his corrupt lies about it, we see that it's fundamentally a colonial project. It's the very same reason why indigenous people push back on European socialists, European Marxists here, right? Because even if you were to establish a socialist, a communist state, right? And I laugh because of a communist state, right? That's hilarious. But if you were to establish a socialist movement here in this country without indigenous populations, Native Americans being in the vanguard, being the ones leading the movement, then what you're essentially doing is you're continuing the process of settler colonialism through a new approach with the new veneer of ideology, but it's still rooted in the suppression and determining the material conditions of indigenous people without their leadership in the movement. So Sam Seder's approach of there was at one point a good Zionist, a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, democratic Zionism, still ignores the fact that Zionism requires colonization of Palestine. Why are Europeans coming and imposing a government on Palestinians? Mind you, when I say Palestinians, I am including Muslims, Christians, and Jewish Palestinians. But he continuously does this. It's disgusting. But nobody's paying attention to this because he's trolling Dennis Prager. He must be on the right side. All right, let's wrap this up because I'm tired of hearing this guy.
I mean, and surely you know this as well. If the part of the Zionist project was to provide a safe home for Jews, I mean, and surely you know this as well. We have Israelis now who are in bomb shelters 4 times a day, and that it has not worked. The peace and security for Jews as a single ethno-national state has not worked.
So therefore, you believe Jews would be more secure if they weren't a Jewish state and it was just a Jewish and Muslim state.
And Christian, I mean, I think that,
there's so few Christians there.
Well, yes, of course.
You believe Jews would be more secure with majority Arab rule?
I think absolutely a multi-ethnic society could be set up. I mean, listen, this is the same thing that people said about South Africa.
I gotta leave it at that because we talked so long.
Okay, well, Dennis, I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. Thank you.
But I think you need to be honest with yourself. If you believe that
I am being honest with myself, Dennis.
Is a failure, it is not that surprising that your son would have demonstrated against Israel on his campus.
Well, I mean,
and then Prager cuts him off, right? Here's the thing. He literally says you have to be honest with yourself. And Emma Vigeland starts laughing, right? Look at this.
You need to be honest with yourself. If you believe
I am being honest with myself, Dennis.
Is a failure.
For them, this is a joke. This is just getting clicks. Mind you, they have, what is it, 1.4 million subscribers. They have a large audience. In 5 days, almost 200,000 people saw this video. And people are just celebrating Sam Seder for this. And so focused in that somebody trolled Dennis Prager, that he was able to call in and troll him, that they're not deconstructing exactly what was said. And how the premise itself negated most of Sam Seder's supposed argument. And you know what's hilarious? That somebody did pick this up. Somebody did notice this. And instead of calling it out, instead of saying, hey, I think we might have messed up, they celebrated this. They doubled down on this. It's pathetic. And it goes to show that they could see what's occurring, they know what the issue is, and they will still celebrate it. None other than Matt Bender. Matt Binder, not sure, don't care. All right, let's pull it up to wrap up this section here. Look at this.
As Dennis Prager said, what Sam was saying was what Ron was saying was very important. So that's why he let him go on over the course of 3 commercial breaks. Very important stuff.
I've never, I mean, you can just, I guess, see why some of these right wingers just make so much money. You can have a commercial break every 2.5 minutes, apparently, on the Dennis Prager show.
Although I did crack up at the very end when obviously Prager doesn't realize this on the show, and I don't think Sam realized it until as he was going through with everything. But at the end, the listener walks away with the idea that there's this guy out there named Ron, who's very upset that his son is partaking in pro-Palestine protests, yet at the same time holds the opinion that the Zionist project has failed. Very weird.
Really amazing. Everyone should check out that debate.
You see that? Matt Bender notices how illogical the whole situation is and how somebody in Dennis Prager's audience is going to walk away confused at this individual, not pushed by his arguments, not focused in on like, hey, maybe he's right on his criticism of Israel and his liberal criticism of Israel. No. What they're going to walk away with is like, wait, what's this guy's position? Who is it? Why is he upset? Like, what's going on? Because it's the premise itself. The way that Sam Seder got on that show by claiming he was wrong, claiming he had a college student child, that he was against him protesting against Israel's actions and in support, pro-Palestine, while simultaneously claiming that he himself is against the settler colonial movement, or he's actually that he's against Israel's apartheid, that it has failed as a project to safeguard Jewish people. It's nonsense. It's nonsensical. And Matt Bender here and the rest of the crew are just laughing at that. What was the point of it then? Just to troll, just to get clicks? Because at the very end, Emma Vigeland says, you should check that out. It's only 42 seconds. Let's hear it out one more time.
Well, as Dennis Prager said, what Sam was saying was what Ron was saying was very important. So that's why he let him go on over the course of 3 commercial breaks. Very important stuff.
I've never, I mean, you can just, I guess, see why some of these right wingers just make so much money. You can have a commercial break every 2.5 minutes, apparently, on the Dennis Prager show.
Although I did crack up at the very end when obviously Prager doesn't realize this on the show, and I don't think Sam realized it until as he was going through with everything. But at the end, the listener walks away with the idea that there's this guy out there named Ron, who's very upset that his son is partaking in pro-Palestine protests, yet at the same time holds the opinion that the Zionist project has failed. Very weird.
Really amazing. Everyone should check out that.
She says, after Matt Bender states the contradictions in Sam Seder's positions, that at one hand, he's upset that his son is out protesting for pro-Palestinians, and on the other, Sam, as quote-unquote Ron here, his alias, is critical of Israel's apartheid and its failure to protect Jewish people. And Emma Vigeland goes, amazing. Go watch it. Go check out that debate. Because it's not, they have no coherent ideology. They actually don't care about the liberation of Palestine. For them, it's just clicks, something they could focus on. There's a reason why Sam Seder hasn't had somebody like Norm Finkelstein on, because he would call out his bullshit about there being a righteous Zionism. All right. They're pathetic, but what do you expect from liberals? A predominantly white show. They go out of their way. I think this is their only token non-white person. All right. Gabor Mate. More alleged anti-Zionist Jewish people who still support the existence of Israel's settler colonial project. How? How, Sway? How? All right.
Overall assessment of where this war is now heading. For that, you need some historical context. Now, look, I used to be a Zionist, and as you mentioned, I'm a Holocaust survivor. Zionism was very important for me as a salvation of the Jewish people, until I found out that the state was founded based on the extirpation, the expulsion, and multiple massacres of the local population. And that's not historically controversial. So I'm taking a longer view of this. And I'm saying that the present situation cannot be understood without looking at the historical context, and nor can we move forward if the present occupation and the suppression of the Palestinians continue. So Sharon, your previous guest, talked about the fragile coexistence. There was no coexistence. There was oppression, periodic massacres, land occupation in the West Bank, the continuous expulsion of the population from their homes. I visited the occupied territories 3 times now. The first time, back during the first Intifada, Piers, I cried every day for 2 weeks at what I saw. So this cannot go on. And I saw the news about the Elgin marbles being returned, and how you changed your mind about that. Well, how about returning the land that's been stolen from the Palestinians? I'm not talking about the state of Israel. I'm not talking about 1948. I'm talking about since 67 and what's going on right now. So there's got to be some stop to what's going on, and that's how I understand it.
No,
this is for the sake of both Israelis and Palestinians.
Yes, I completely.
So he's anti-Zionist. He renounced his dream of the Zionist promise, and yet he's saying, "Oh, I'm talking about 68, not 48, and I want both Palestinians and Israelis to be safe." So how are you anti-Zionist? No, you're a liberal Zionist. Let's hear that from the top, and we'll break it down.
Just heard firsthand what that has been like for the people in Israel who suffered that, but also, of course, what's going on now in Gaza with many thousands of innocent people being killed with Israel's military response, including thousands of children. What is your overall assessment of where this war is now heading?
For that, you need some historical context. Now, look, I used to be a Zionist. As you mentioned, I'm a Holocaust survivor.
He used to be a Zionist. Okay. All right. So let's hear his anti-Zionist analysis.
Zionism was very important for me as a salvation of the Jewish people, until I found out that the state was founded based on the extirpation, the expulsion, and multiple massacres of the local population. And that
The massacre, the expulsion of the local population, the indigenous Palestinians. That's how Israel was founded. He knows how it was funded. So he's an anti-Zionist, and he understands the history, the origins of Israel. So, with that information, he should be against the existence of a settler colonial project in Palestine. Is he? No, of course not. Because all these individuals that claim to be anti-Zionists or have renounced their Zionism are just liberal Zionists. Because they're not calling for the decolonization of Palestine.
that's not historically controversial. So I'm taking a longer view of this. And I'm saying that the present situation cannot be understood without looking at the historical context, and nor can we move forward.
So he's accurately saying, if you don't know the history, you're not going to understand what's going on today. And there's no way that we can move forward without acknowledging and understanding and confronting the history, which he understands as Israel's inception being one of massacres and expulsions of indigenous people. Okay. So how do you arrive to the wrong conclusion?
If the present occupation and the suppression of the Palestinians continue. So Sharon, your previous guest, talked about the fragile coexistence. There was no coexistence. There was oppression, periodic massacres, land occupation in the West Bank, the continuous expulsion of the population from their homes. I visited the occupied territory.
So he knows that there was this dream that Sam Seder attempts to push, that somehow there was some holy, righteous, Zionist existence. No, from its inception, Zionism, as he articulated, from its inception, it's a settler colonial project. That's what Zionism is. But this liberal Zionist mindset of somehow understanding that it's a lie that there was coexistence or that there was ever the intent to peacefully coexist, they still, in their minds, they still cannot reject the continued existence of the settler colonial project. Why? Can somebody help me understand why that is? I don't understand it. You know the history. You're able to articulate it perfectly. but you still don't arrive to the right conclusion. You still support its continued existence.
So it's 3 times now. The first time, back during the first Intifada, Piers, I cried every day for 2 weeks at what I saw. So this cannot go on. And I saw the news about the Elgin marbles being returned, and how you changed your mind about that. Well, how about returning the land that's been stolen from the Palestinians? I'm not talking about the state of Israel. I'm not talking about 1948. I'm talking about since 67 and what's going on right now. So
he's like, what about returning the land? He's like, I'm not talking about Israel. I'm not talking about 48. I'm not talking about its inception, which I just articulated, that was from the onset a colonial project, genocidal in nature, massacres and explosions. I'm not talking about that, he's saying. Let's ignore the history for this part. Let's not address the root problem here. Why is it? Why is it that this mind virus prevents them to just, with their chest, say, fuck this settler colonial project. It needs to end, and that's the only way that we'll find peace. You know the history. You understand it. You said it yourself. And still you refuse to say 48. That's where the problem started. That's what we need to address. That's what we need to return to. No. You do the whole fucking liberal Zionist two-state thing, two-state solution. So you're still rewarding settler colonialism. You're not giving them everything that they want, but you're still rewarding them. It's disgusting.
I saw the news about the Elgin marbles being returned, and how you changed your mind about that. Well, how about returning the land that's been stolen from the Palestinians? I'm not talking about the state of Israel. I'm not talking about 1948. I'm talking about since 67 and what's going on right now. So there's got to be some stop to what's going on, and that's how I understand it.
No,
This is for the sake of both Israelis and Palestinians.
Yes, I completely.
For the sake of both Israelis and Palestinians, see how they equate the colonized with the colonizer? And we've been over this. Fanon talks about it. There's 2 species only, the colonized and the colonizer. That's it. I'm not talking about 48. So you're not anti-Zionist. Dope. Okay. We're speed running this. We're going through it. Mehdi Hasan. Mehdi Hasan. Oh, man. So, everybody wants to give credit to Mehdi Hasan because he rightfully holds these Zionist political leaders, to accountable. He puts their feet to the fire. But he is like a DNC, like chill DNC, simple, however you want to call it. This guy's always rooting and supporting the DNC. So what happens to him? Well, he gets rewarded for trying to be a good boy, right? Trying to accurately push back on the Zionists. But he thought that because I'm supporting the Democratic Party so much, because I'm wagging my finger and calling out the extreme left, that I'm safe. He goes viral, meaning that he's attracting a younger generation. His ratings is not that great. Again, his show used to be, because it got canceled, or it's about to get canceled, right? It's wrapping up on Saturdays. So it's sad because it's like, bro, you only have a limited time, a limited lifespan in these white spaces. So instead of wagging your finger and condemning Hamas to be seen as one of the good ones, double down, 10 toes down, and say, no. It's not Hamas. It's the liberation forces of Palestine. That's what it is. It's a liberation movement. So his show is getting canceled. And this is almost the insult to the initial injury, I don't know if y'all remember, but initially, MSNBC was putting all their Browns in the back room. They did not want to risk getting embarrassed, having pushback. Look, inside MSNBC's Middle East conflict, right? This happened, this was written October 13th. Remember, the military operation was on October 7th. MSNBC has quietly taken 3 of its Muslim broadcasters out of the anchor chair since Hamas attack on Israel last Saturday, amid Americans' wave of sympathy for Israel terror victims. The network did not air a scheduled Thursday night episode of the Mehdi Hasan show on the streaming platform Peacock. So they've already put this motherfucker on timeout. They told him, they let him know what they think about him. Like, we will fucking put you in the corner so you don't embarrass us, so you don't speak out of line, so you know your place. And now they're canceling the show. So instead of going out in a blaze of glory, saying, no, I support resistance by any means necessary, he's still playing footsies with these liberals. So yes, it's great that he's pushing back and embarrassing these Zionists. But when you've already been shown how disposable you are, how the company you work for despises your existence and will shun you at a moment's notice just to avoid being exposed for their pro-Zionist stance, why not go out in a blaze of glory? Why not actually advocate for the complete decolonization of Palestine? It's sad, it's pathetic, but that's what you fucking get. Of all people, Jeffrey Epstein's friend, Noam Chomsky, spoke about this. The only reason you're allowed to be in that position is because they know you're not a threat. They know you're not going to step out of line. We'll hear it right here, right? Let me pull it up here for y'all. Manufacturing consent, everybody loves to mention it.
Censoring organization. Tell me how that works. You're not suggesting that proprietors phone one another up, or that many journalists get to their copies spiked, as we say?
It's actually Orwell, you may recall, has an essay called Literary Censorship in England, which was supposed to be the introduction to Animal Farm, except that it never appeared, in which he points out, look, I'm writing about a totalitarian society, but in free democratic England, it's not all that different. And then he says unpopular ideas can be silenced without any force. And then he gives a two-sentence response, which is not very profound, but captures it. He says 2 reasons. First, the press is owned by wealthy men who have every interest in not having certain things appear. But second, the whole educational system, from the beginning on through, just gets you to understand that there are certain things you just don't say. Well, spelling these things out, that's perfectly correct. I mean, the first sentence is what we expanded.
This is what I don't get. It suggests that, I mean, I'm sure people like are self-censoring.
No, not self-censoring. There's a filtering system that starts in kindergarten, goes all the way through, and it doesn't work 100%, but it's pretty effective. It selects for obedience and subordination, and especially, I think,
so stroppy people won't make it.
There'll be behavior problems, or if you read applications to a graduate school, you see that people will tell you he doesn't get along too well with his colleagues. You know how to interpret those things.
I'm just interested because I was brought up, like a lot of people, probably post-Watergate film and so on, to believe that journalism was a crusading craft and that there were a lot of disputatious, stroppy, difficult people in journalism. And I have to say, I think I know some of them.
Well, I know some of the best and best-known investigative reporters in the United States. I won't mention names, but whose attitude toward the media is much more cynical than mine. In fact, they regard the media as a sham, and they know, and they consciously talk about how they try to play it like a violin. If they see a little opening, they'll try to squeeze something in that ordinarily wouldn't make it through. And it's perfectly true that I'm sure you're speaking for the majority of journalists who are trained, have it driven into their heads that this is a crusading profession, adversarial, we stand up against power, very self-serving view. On the other hand, in my opinion, I hate to make a value judgment, but the better journalists, and in fact the ones who are often regarded as the best journalists, are quite a different picture, and I think a very realistic one.
How can you know that I'm self-censored? How can you know that journalists
self-censoring? I'm sure you believe everything you're saying. But what I'm saying is if you believe something different, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting.
If you believe something different, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting. Well, Mehdi Hasan, you won't be sitting on the anchor chair anymore. It's unfortunate that those viral clips, somebody exposing the Zionists, we won't have that anymore. But you should have known better. October 13th, they told you, they showed you. We'll cancel your show like that. We won't even allow you to be a contributor. Now it's like we're canceling your show. You come around. We want the clicks every now and then. We want the social media, algorithms to be in our favor. You chose to play ball with them, and this is what your reward. Do you think he's going to actually double down and embrace, resistance, actual, celebrating resistance movements? Hell no, he won't. He won't. He'll try to be a good boy. If anything, they're gonna clip his wings further, and he's gonna accept it. He's gonna say thank you, and hope that someday he can return to the limelight. In 10 years, we're gonna see Mehdi Hasan as basically Piers Morgan in brownface. As Bob Dylan said, I'm younger than you. All right, we're gonna wrap this up with Bad Faith.
Kinds of conditions.
Now remember, Craig Mokhiber here, quit working for the UN because he saw reality. Forget about the writing on the wall. He saw reality. That Israel's committing a genocide, that the US is supporting it, and the UN is too cowardly to do anything about it. And in reality, the UN can't do anything about it because it's not a legitimate force. Like, there's nothing you can do. It's beholden to the US.
Of life. Okay, all of that is quite striking, but what's even more striking is the question of intent in this case. Now, the World Court, the International Court of Justice, has said because it's so hard to prove intent in normal cases, that you can infer intent from conduct. So you look at 75 years of ethnic purges carried out by Israel, in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, in Gaza. That alone represents compelling evidence of the intent of Israel to carry out yet another ethnic purge of Gaza. Even before you get to inferring intent, in this case, the climate of impunity under which Israel has operated for many decades now, and frankly underwritten by the government of the United States, of the UK, and some European countries as well, diplomatic and military buttressing of that impunity by Western states, especially the US, that has led to a situation which is unprecedented in modern history, where Israeli officials have been declaring their genocidal intent openly and publicly and on the record since the beginning of the assault. That's very rare, right? Typically, you have to dig through dusty old government archives and communications that show that there was genocidal intent. Not necessary here because of the open declaration of genocidal intent, because, and that's what's rare in this case, they are so absolutely certain that they will not be held accountable. The international community has tried to hold them accountable for atrocities year after year, has never succeeded because they are protected by the United States and other Western governments. So in this case, you've got the Israeli president, the prime minister, several cabinet officials, senior military officials, think tanks affiliated with the government, and before you even get to the media, who are openly dehumanizing the Palestinians in Gaza as animals, as inhuman, as terrorists, as cancer, as vermin, and so on, and have declared openly an intent to wipe out all of Gaza, right? Stating the intention not to distinguish between civilians and combatants, and even expressing the need to raze Gaza to the ground, to reduce it to rubble, to have another Nakba, explicitly, one minister has said. And of course, everybody by now has heard Netanyahu, the prime minister's reference to the biblical story of Amalek, commanding the entire population be wiped out, and none be spared, men, women, suckling babies, and livestock, as the quote goes. So in other words, in this very rare case, you've actually got Israeli leaders making the case for genocidal intent. One more point on this, if I may.
Please.
Another thing that we use in genocide analysis is to look at the issue of capacity, because a lot of people in the middle of a war will say horrible things. And then somebody will say, well, you see, it's genocide. But it's not, because they have no capacity to carry it out. So in genocide analysis, we look for that. And as we know, Israel has constructed this very powerful apparatus of repression, which it has firmly entrenched in all of Palestine and Israel, including military occupation forces, assault forces, abusive police contingents, ruthless intelligence agencies, physical walls and fences and barbed wire, advanced monitoring and surveillance technologies, drones, autonomous robots that are mounted with machine guns, and facilitating violent armed settlers, a whole system of repressive laws, and the imposition of apartheid across the land.
So the means, right? A lot of people can talk the talk, but Israel, can walk that walk. They're a nuclear power. Everybody denies it. They'll never admit it. But we know that Israel was offering South Africa, apartheid South Africa, nuclear weapons. So they've had them, or at least the ability, for that long. But this is the thing. Israel knows that it has the full support of the West. So they're just saying it out loud. They don't need to hide anything. They don't need to pretend. They're calling people Amalek. Bro, I didn't even know what that was. Do you know what a raging genocidal freak you have to be to start quoting the Old Testament as your reasoning, as your excuse to massacre and commit genocide? And the whole world is supposed to support you and applaud you? Because let's be clear, when somebody says we're the chosen people, we are the ones God has, chosen as more righteous, as holier, everybody else is Cain, we are Abel. Anybody can be Amalek. Anybody opposing Zionism is Amalek. So in their mind frame, in their mindset, anybody opposing Zionism should be exterminated. And we know this because Jewish people who spoke out against Zionism, Holocaust survivors that spoke out against Zionism, were targeted by the Zionist state. Some even murdered, assassinated. Anybody opposing Zionism is Amalek. And they have the means and the resources to end those people, to silence those voices.
So that means that Palestinians are entirely subjugated, forcibly contained and interned, almost completely defenseless, and subject to regular attacks both by the Israeli military and by violent Israeli settlers. That means that Israel has the means, the capacity to carry out a genocide, which ratchets up the warning one level higher. And of course, all of those means that I just listed are in fact being actively deployed as I speak. And then the last thing is there's a kind of a 10-step analysis that we use in identifying genocide. If we have time, I'm happy to talk about those 10 steps. But just to say that each of those 10 stages of genocide has already been carried out in the situation of Palestine. And so I made the argument that if there is this prohibition on genocide in international law, if there are these institutions that are supposed to do preventive work to make sure that these acts are not carried out, if there are the Geneva Conventions that prohibit war crimes and that impose upon all states obligations to prevent and to stop these kinds of violations, and if we see, again, complete impunity vis-a-vis the Israeli perpetrators, not only will we have abandoned all of these millions of civilians being subjected to this horrific brutality, but the other collateral damage could be international law itself. And the next time somebody wants to raise an issue of war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, it will fall on deaf ears because we will have so neutered international law by ignoring it in such a clear case that it won't be available much longer for people who are being oppressed in other parts of the world. That's a clear, compelling, prima facie manifestation of both the acts and the intent of genocide, and so far, no effort to hold the perpetrators to account. And that's why I raised it. That's why I continue to raise it. And I think absolutely, since I warned of this months ago, it has only come to pass much more forcefully, much more brutally, much more completely.
And props to him. Honestly, he will go down in history as a rational voice, as a righteous voice. Because as he states here, the problem and the issue isn't only with the current ongoing genocide that Israel is conducting, completely free. Biden has pulled back restrictions on what weapons the U.S. can send to Israel. So they're being encouraged to commit a genocide. Biden wants them to wrap it up as quickly as possible. They got to hurry up before election season starts, and they got to start, cleaning the slate. But he focuses in on how this genocide, as it goes not unnoticed, but unchallenged by the UN and those power structures, will allow or give an opening for other genocides to occur. The floodgates will open. If you don't stop it now, countless of other people around the world won't have an ability to raise their voices. We won't be able to stop other genocides. But that's always been the case as long as you have Western support. The only difference is before the US used to either deny or be, behind the scenes. Special operations, right? But this is upfront. Joe Biden was repeating Zionist propaganda lies about babies being beheaded. The president of the United States. There is no limit. There is no bottom for how far the US will go in support of Zionist genocide of the Palestinian population. And it's only going to get worse. Not just in Israel, not just there in their actions against Palestinians, but around the world. What do you think happens when Israel starts acting more like a baby US and starts supporting and funding genocide in the region? All right, let's wrap this up here.
There's a worse level of sin, which is when it rises to the level of legal complicity. And the Genocide Convention outlaws a lot of acts. It outlaws, acts of genocide, attempted genocide, incitement to genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, and complicity in genocide. And the reason I'm saying the U.S. is complicit is because while the atrocities are happening in real time, the U.S. continues to provide economic, military, intelligence support, diplomatic cover, even the use of the veto to block a ceasefire in the Security Council, meaning, simple terms, legal complicity. The U.S. is in violation of the laws that prohibit these kinds of atrocities, and it is an actor. There's an additional actor in the crime. The crimes as they are unfolding. So there's that distinction, right? You didn't see the U.S. actively participating in genocide in Myanmar, in Bosnia, in Rwanda, other cases. What you saw was them breaching their obligations to take affirmative action. But in this case, the U.S. is a participant in the genocide being perpetrated on the Palestinians.
One of the more recent examples being this reporting from The Intercept that Biden has moved to lift nearly every restriction on Israel's access to the U.S.'s weapons stockpile.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole discussion there about the corruption of the governments of the West, the U.S. in particular, and the amount of political capture by various interest groups. But you could be a 1L with no experience and make the case for U.S. complicity in genocide in this case. It's just as obvious as the act of genocide being perpetrated by Israel is the role being played by the U.S. because it's all happening in public. Right? So there's that distinction to be sure. The other distinction, though, Brianna, is
let's break that down really quickly.
Responsibility. We're trying to stop the genocide. That's one level of sin.
So you have a responsibility, at least the UN does, to stop a genocide. Right? That's actively stopping something.
There's a worse level of sin.
But then here he goes on to explain what's worse than refusing to stop a genocide is what? Aiding a genocide, which is exactly what the U.S. is doing.
Which is when it rises to the level of legal complicity. And the Genocide Convention outlaws a lot of acts. It outlaws acts of genocide, attempted genocide, incitement to genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, and complicity in genocide. And the reason I'm saying the U.S. is complicit is because while the atrocities are happening in real time, the U.S. continues to provide economic, military, intelligence support, diplomatic cover, even the use of the veto to block a ceasefire in the Security Council, meaning, simple terms, legal complicity. The U.S. is in violation of the laws that prohibit these kinds of atrocities, and it is an actor. There's an additional actor in the crimes as they are unfolding. So there's that distinction, right?
So the U.S. by proxy is committing a genocide because Israel will not be able to do any of this on its own. It's vetoing a ceasefire, the most liberal, most milquetoast, most down the middle thing imaginable, a ceasefire. Not calling for the end of the settler colonial project, not calling, for the liberation of Palestinians, not calling for decolonization of Palestine. No, a ceasefire. What Kwame Ture said the status quo. That which keeps the liberals safe and comfortable, the status quo. That's what they were calling for, a ceasefire. And the U.S. vetoed that in order to aid and protect Israel's continued genocide of Palestinians.
didn't see the U.S. actively participating in genocide in Myanmar, in Bosnia, in Rwanda, other cases. What you saw was them breaching their obligations to take affirmative action. In this case, the U.S. is a participant in the genocide being perpetrated on the Palestinians.
One of the more recent examples being this reporting from The Intercept that Biden has moved to lift nearly every restriction on Israel's access to the U.S.'s weapons stockpile.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole discussion there about the corruption of the governments of the West, the U.S. in particular, and the amount of political capture by various interest groups. But you could be a 1L with no experience and make the case for U.S. complicity in genocide in this case. It's just as obvious as the act of genocide being perpetrated by Israel is the role being played by the U.S. because it's all happening in public. Right? So there's that distinction to be sure. The other distinction, though, Brianna, is there is at least lip service to accountability. So the U.S. government, the British government, European governments, after the other genocides in Myanmar, in Rwanda, in Bosnia Herzegovina, the Yazidis in the Middle East as well, they all said there must be accountability for the perpetrators of these things. They called it genocide and they supported accountability. In this case, they're doing everything they can to block any accountability for the perpetrators, and in doing so, block any justice for the victims, and in doing so, pretty much guaranteeing that the deterrent effect of these kinds of international laws is being weakened and eroded in ways that suggest that in the future there won't be recourse to these kinds of international laws. That's a very considerable distinction between what's happening in this case and what's happened in the other cases. Now, for me, the thing that I felt immediately was how that the positioning of powerful Western states in the face of this genocide was being played out was also influencing what the United Nations was doing and saying. And that wasn't something that just grew up this year. It's something that had been building over a period of decades where there is this idea of Israeli exceptionalism in the UN. And I've always said this, it's not the whole UN that I'm condemning here. I believe in the UN. I worked there for 32 years. I believe in all of those, I think, absolutely heroic humanitarian workers and human rights workers and development workers who are in the field because they hate poverty, because they hate war, because they hate discrimination, right? They're doing their job, but they have been abandoned by the political leadership of the UN, which is the higher you get up the ladder, the more trepidation you find, the more leaders, senior political leaders are afraid of pressure from the Americans, the Brits, the Israel lobby, which has now set up specific organizations just to put pressure on and persecute UN staff who dare to speak out on human rights in Palestine. So that really is something very, very different that you don't see elsewhere. And it's a very aggressive campaign in the case of the US that will threaten to cut off budgets, to not cooperate in other UN initiatives. And that's different. That's not something you see in other cases. So there are a lot of distinctions. And my real frustration was that in the face of that the senior leadership in the UN didn't have the courage or the principle to insist on applying to Israel what they apply to every other state in the world. And they're always ready, by the way, to be extremely forceful, both rhetorically and in terms of action that they approve. If it's a smaller, weaker state, a state in the global south, an armed group, but if it's a part of the West, if it is Israel, the United States, or the UK, different story.
And there it is. The way that the U.S. not only carries the big stick, but it carries a big wallet. And what it's doing is essentially committing, economic blackmail. If you oppose us, we'll stop funding you. We'll stop providing aid, right? All for what? What purpose? For genocide. To arm and fund and protect a genocidal settler colonial project. For Zionism. But it'll speak up and it'll run its mouth about smaller countries. Look at the way they talk about Cuba, right? I believe Cuba's still on the terrorist funders list. Meanwhile, the U.S. is funding a fucking genocide. One of the reasons why, as much as I enjoy watching or listening to and reading Norm Finkelstein's work, why he's limited in this topic, in this area, this field of Palestine's colonization, is because how much he adheres to international law. When we see here that international law doesn't mean shit. Power does. So fundamentally, at the end of the day, Palestinians are only left with one choice, and that is armed resistance to their occupiers. It's as simple as that. It's always unfortunate when that is the only course you can take, but time and time again, colonizers all around the world have demonstrated that they understand no other language but force. That is the only solution. To be diplomatic, to try and find legal avenues to constrain their actions, to find a way to create peace through the pen, only gives them more opportunity, more legitimizations, only legitimizes them more and gives them more opportunities to bide their time to strike. That is the history of Zionism, biding their time to strike, to have enough people, to have enough arms, for those opportune moments to continue the progressive genocide of Palestinians. They've learned, they literally sent people out, the Zionists sent people out to the South here in the States during segregation. They sent people out South Africa during apartheid to study the best methods to oppress, a segregated population. You don't think they also studied, much like Hitler studied, the colonization of the Americas? You don't think they're aware of the modern, lens of view of modern people in terms of colonization and genocide? They're quite aware of it. That's why they fund so much of their PR, so much of their propaganda. That's why they're so concerned about TikTok. Because they want to be seen as the victims, as the heroes. They want to be David. They want to trick everybody that they're not Goliath. But that's what they are. All right. Let's wrap this up. We're going to do the introduction. We're going to go back to reading the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. We'll knock out the intro. And then we'll head out. Homie's going to be late to work. All right. There's a strategy for the liberation of Palestine, 1969. Introduction. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, in spite of the short time that has elapsed since its foundation, its political age is barely 1.5 years at the time of the writing course, has come to constitute, from the objective viewpoint, a political, military manifestation that attacks the interests of wide circles of the Palestinian people, while at the same time, daily attracting increased interest on both Arab and world levels. This manifestation, inasmuch as it bears the factors of revolutionary growth through which it is endeavoring to attain the level of historical revolution, is also facing a combination of real dangers, both subjective and objective, which threatens its existence and attempt to impede its growth and progress. In light of this general evaluation of the front's existence, which demands alertness, a deep sense of historical responsibility, and a conscious understanding of the importance of scientific precision in viewing the struggle and in facing the problems of operation. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine held its Congress in February 1969. It studied the strategy of Palestinian revolutionary action and defined the general political, organizational, and military steps which should be taken to ensure the front's consistent growth so as to enable it to rise to a level of the liberation challenge which it has undertaken. So that's just the introduction. Unfortunately, I'm out of time, y'all. But we are going to... I need to add also my annotations. I have the book. It's around here somewhere. But we're going to get back to this. I know last week we skipped it again out of time constraint. But fundamentally, this is my favorite part of streaming, is just going over the readings, breaking it down. But again, the big thing that we need to focus here, at least in the introduction, is here it is right here. A deep sense of historical responsibility. And we have that challenge as well, right? To study and to learn and to be comfortable and articulate with the history of colonization in general, in order to be able to educate others on it. Of course, we want to give the primary sources, even video essays, whatever, to provide an easy avenue. We know how hard the government has pushed illiteracy, the lack of critical reading skills, just how many people don't find reading enjoyable, studying enjoyable. That's not by accident. So this is my favorite part of it. Unfortunately, I gotta go to work. Yeah, I'm trying out different times to see what works best for everybody. Um, but next time we're gonna do a longer stream, at least focus on the reading, because there's a lot of great things coming up that I really, really, I was blown away. Again, I need to add my annotations from the book. I carry that book around. Uh, when your attention span is as limited as mine, when you get distracted so easily, you need to carry a book around wherever you are. Take advantage of any downtime. But yeah, the importance of political thought is a great section. But my favorite one should be coming up. Who are our enemies? That is so important. Okay. Thank you for tuning in. Subscribe, like the stream, all that. But always remember, never give your money to streamers. Never do that. That's not what it's about. Anybody that has a Patreon and isn't out doing the work, getting off their ass, it's just taking advantage of the working class. Appreciate ya. Hasta la próxima. Gracias.